He chose freedom over family and shut the door, but 4 years later at the airport, he saw exactly what he had lost. Ethan Blake had built his empire on ambition, charm, and an unwavering refusal to let anything tie him down. At 32, he was the kind of man who could close a billion-dollar deal before breakfast and spend the evening drinking champagne at rooftop parties that overlooked the glittering skyline. People admired him, feared him, and envied him, but no one truly knew him, not even Lily, the woman who had quietly slipped past the walls he kept so carefully constructed. She had not come into his life as part of his world but from a different universe entirely. Lily had grown up modestly, working hard, chasing her own dreams in the shadows of a life that seemed impossibly far from his. Yet somehow their paths had crossed, and for a brief moment it seemed as though they might create something meaningful together, though Ethan never allowed himself to admit it out loud. The night she told him she was pregnant, the air between them shifted into something sharp and unbearable. They had just returned from a dinner where she had laughed and glowed under the soft lights, her hand brushing against his as if she were testing whether he would let her in further. When the words left her lips, his world tilted, but not in the way most men would feel when told they were going to be a father. For Ethan, the announcement wasn't a beginning but the sound of a door closing on everything he had convinced himself he wanted. A family meant responsibility, vulnerability, and permanence, things he had spent his whole life running from. He could already feel the weight of chains he didn't yet wear, and the panic spread through him faster than he could control. Lily had looked at him with hope in her eyes, searching his face for something, support, excitement, or even fear wrapped in love. What she found instead was a mask of coldness. Ethan's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but not a frown either, and he said words that would forever echo in her memory. Family? That's not what I want. I need freedom, not this. His voice was steady, but there was a crack beneath it that only he could hear, the faintest trace of doubt buried under layers of arrogance. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked away, closing the door behind him as though shutting out the sound of her quiet, stifled breath. In that moment, Lily's world collapsed. She had always known Ethan was complicated, that the walls around him were higher than she might ever climb, but she had believed that somewhere inside those walls was a man who could love her, a man who would love their child. Standing in the silence of that empty apartment, she pressed her hands against her stomach as though she could shield the life growing inside her from the rejection that had just been spoken into existence. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would not feed her baby, would not change his mind, and would not make the world kinder. She squared her shoulders and decided then and there that if Ethan chose freedom, she would choose strength. For Ethan, the decision haunted him more than he cared to admit. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had cut the rope before it tied him to a future that wasn't his. He filled his calendar with meetings and late nights, drowned himself in work, and let distractions blur the ache gnawing in his chest. Yet every so often, when the city lights dimmed and the laughter around him faded, he would find himself wondering what might have been if he hadn't walked away. The sound of Lily's voice lingered in his memory like a song he couldn't forget, and though he silenced it with excuses, the truth clawed quietly at him in the dark. Lily, meanwhile, found herself alone but not broken. She picked up extra shifts, took freelance work, and used every ounce of her determination to build a new life from the ashes of the one Ethan had abandoned. At first, it was unbearable. Nights stretched long with exhaustion, mornings began before dawn, and her body ached with the strain of carrying not just her unborn children but the crushing weight of responsibility. Still, each time she felt the gentle flutter inside her belly, she reminded herself that there was something worth fighting for, something more important than her pride or her pain. That first chapter of their story ended not with reconciliation but with separation. Ethan embraced his freedom with a hollow kind of victory, and Lily embraced her future with a heavy but unyielding resolve. Neither of them realized in that moment that the choice made in anger and fear would ripple through their lives for years, shaping not only who they were but who they would one day become. Lily's days quickly blurred into an endless cycle of work, exhaustion, and determination. The world had shifted beneath her feet the night Ethan walked away, and while she sometimes woke with the echo of his words still ringing in her ears, she refused to let that be the end of her story. She was carrying not just one life, but two, and every decision she made now had to be guided by the reality that she was the only one standing between her daughters and the uncertainty of the world. At first, she leaned on the few friends she had, but as her pregnancy became harder and her body began to tire, she realized that most people drift away when things become difficult. What remained was her own resilience, and though it scared her, it also became a source of strength she had never known she possessed. The nights were the hardest. She would sit at the small kitchen table in her modest apartment, sewing fabric scraps into dresses she hoped to sell online. The hum of the old machine filled the silence, and as her hands worked, her mind wandered to the future. She wondered if her daughters would have his eyes, his sharp jaw, his stubborn smile. Sometimes, she hated herself for hoping they would not look like him, as though their resemblance might reopen wounds she was trying so desperately to heal. Yet deep down she knew it would not matter, because her love for them would override everything else. With each tiny kick inside her, she whispered promises that they would always be loved, that she would never walk away as he had, and that she would give them a life worth living, no matter how hard it became for her. When the twins were born, the world changed again. Emma and Chloe arrived in the middle of a storm, their cries loud and insistent as if they already knew they had been born into a battle. Holding them in her arms for the first time, Lily felt the weight of her exhaustion dissolve into awe. Their tiny fingers clutched at her skin, and their bright blue eyes blinked up at her with a clarity that nearly broke her heart. They were perfect, and in that perfection she found the strength to push past her fear. She no longer cared that Ethan wasn't there, that he had chosen freedom over fatherhood. In that sterile hospital room, with thunder rattling the windows, Lily made a vow to her daughters that she would never let them feel unwanted or unloved. The months that followed were brutal. Sleepless nights bled into weary mornings, bottles lined up in endless rows, and bills seemed to pile faster than she could pay them. She often ate less so that there was more for the babies, and she worked between their naps, her body aching from fatigue. But in the middle of the exhaustion came moments of pure joy. Emma's first smile, Chloe's first laugh, the way they curled up against her chest as though they belonged there forever, those were the moments that kept her going. She started selling more dresses, her designs catching the attention of bloggers who admired her creativity and grit. Slowly, she built something that resembled stability, though she always carried the fear that it could crumble at any moment. Ethan, on the other hand, knew nothing of these struggles. While Lily was piecing together a new life stitch by stitch, he was still chasing his illusion of freedom. His calendar was filled with meetings and deals, his nights with parties and women who never asked for more than a few hours of his time. Outwardly, he was thriving, the picture of success, but there were cracks beneath the surface. When he saw other men carrying their children or laughing with their families, an uncomfortable pang tugged at him, one he quickly buried beneath another glass of whiskey or another late night in the office. He told himself he had escaped a trap, that he had been smart to walk away, yet some part of him whispered that perhaps he had left behind something more valuable than all his wealth combined. Lily did not waste time thinking of him anymore. She focused on Emma and Chloe, on the growing success of her small business, on surviving one day at a time. But in the quiet moments, when the twins slept and the apartment fell silent, she sometimes felt the sharp ache of loneliness creep in. She would glance at the empty space beside her in bed and wonder what her life might have been if Ethan had chosen differently. Yet each time, she reminded herself that regret was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her daughters needed her strong, and she would not falter. By the time the twins turned 3, Lily was no longer the same woman who had been left behind. Her dresses were now sold in boutiques, her name whispered among fashion circles as an up-and-coming designer with a raw, authentic touch. She carried herself differently, not with arrogance but with the quiet dignity of someone who had built her life out of nothing. She was still young, but the hardships had etched resilience into her bones. She looked at Emma and Chloe and saw in them not just her greatest challenge but also her greatest triumph. They were proof that even when abandoned, she had not been defeated. Ethan, meanwhile, would soon learn that freedom without love was its own kind of prison. But for now, Lily stood alone, holding the hands of her daughters, unaware that fate was preparing to bring their paths crashing together once more in the most unexpected of ways. By the time Emma and Chloe were 4 years old, Lily's life had transformed into something she never could have imagined during those nights when she sat alone at the kitchen table, fighting back tears as she stitched fabric for pennies. Her brand had taken root in ways that even she sometimes struggled to comprehend. What began as a desperate attempt to make ends meet had blossomed into a thriving label that boutiques in several cities now proudly displayed. She had hired a small team, rented a studio with tall windows that bathed the room in light, and traveled occasionally to present her collections at local shows. Each success was hard-won, carved from the relentless hours she poured into her work, but each one also carried the sweetness of proof that she had not been broken by the man who once swore he wanted only freedom. Her daughters, though still so young, were part of this journey. They often played among rolls of fabric in her studio, their laughter weaving itself into the very threads of her designs, as though her work and her motherhood were forever intertwined. Lily was not naive. She knew her stability was fragile and could vanish if she faltered, but the steady stream of recognition had given her something even more powerful than money: confidence. She no longer felt like the girl who had been left behind, she felt like a woman who had fought her way through fire and come out stronger. People noticed her now for her talent and vision, not for her connection to Ethan or for being a single mother. She guarded her personal life closely, presenting to the world an image of grace and control, though only she knew the nights when fear still gnawed at her, whispering that it could all collapse. Yet each morning, when Emma and Chloe ran into her room and leapt into her bed with squeals of laughter, she found strength again. The girls were her anchor, the reason every sacrifice had been worth it. Meanwhile, Ethan had continued his life as if nothing had ever changed, but deep down, he knew it was an illusion. The freedom he had clung to with such desperation felt less like liberation and more like an empty echo. His calendar remained full, his wealth continued to multiply, and women still lingered at his side, but none of it filled the space he refused to acknowledge. He had everything he once thought he wanted, yet it felt strangely hollow. At times, he caught himself staring at families in airports or restaurants, fathers holding their children with pride, mothers glowing with love, and something inside him tightened. He buried it quickly, convincing himself that he had made the right choice, that a family would have trapped him, that he had chosen power over weakness. But in the stillness of the night, when the world was quiet and no one was watching, he sometimes heard the faint echo of Lily's voice and wondered what those children might have looked like if he had stayed. It was fate, or perhaps irony, that their paths crossed again, not in some carefully orchestrated event but in the chaos of an airport. Ethan was returning from a trip abroad, tired and restless, moving briskly through the terminal with his suitcase in hand when his gaze caught on a figure just ahead of him in the crowd. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks, that exhaustion had conjured a ghost, but then he saw her clearly. Lily. Her hair, slightly longer now, shimmered under the fluorescent lights, her posture poised but unpretentious, and beside her were 2 little girls clutching her hands. They were laughing, their tiny backpacks bouncing as they skipped. And then Ethan froze. The girls looked up at her, then glanced around the busy terminal, and he saw their eyes. Blue, strikingly blue, the very same shade that stared back at him in the mirror every morning. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. The noise of rolling luggage and boarding announcements faded, replaced by the pounding of his own heartbeat. His carefully constructed life, built on denial and pride, cracked in that instant. He was staring at what he had lost, what he had turned his back on, and the weight of it nearly brought him to his knees. Lily noticed him then, her gaze locking with his across the crowded terminal. She did not falter, did not flinch, but her eyes told a story of strength and resilience born of pain. There was no welcome in her expression, only a wall he had built himself the night he shut the door on her. Ethan wanted to move, to speak, to call out her name, but his body betrayed him. He stood rooted in place, watching as the twins tugged at Lily's arms, asking questions, their voices too faint for him to hear but their joy unmistakable. For the first time in years, he felt not like a powerful man in control of his destiny but like a stranger looking in on a life that should have been his. The freedom he once clung to now tasted like ash, and the vision of those blue-eyed girls branded itself into his soul. In that moment, he understood with terrifying clarity that he had not escaped anything at all. He had abandoned everything. Ethan spent the hours after that airport encounter in a haze, as though he were trapped between reality and a dream that refused to let him go. He had seen Lily, there was no denying it, and more than that, he had seen the two little girls who could not have been anyone else's but his. Their eyes had been the unmistakable proof, blue and piercing like his own, and their laughter still rang in his ears as if mocking him for the years he had spent convincing himself he had chosen the right path. He sat in the back of his chauffeured car after leaving the terminal, staring out the window without really seeing the city rushing past him. For the first time in years, his phone lay silent in his lap, ignored despite the endless stream of emails and calls demanding his attention. None of it mattered. All he could think about was how she had looked at him, not with love or even anger, but with a cold strength that told him she had survived without him and no longer needed him. That, more than anything, left him feeling hollow. Lily, on the other hand, had walked away from that chance encounter with her heart pounding. She had known it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again, especially now that her career had gained recognition in circles where Ethan still moved. But she had not expected it to be so sudden, so raw, in the chaos of an airport where there had been no time to prepare. The look on his face when he saw the girls had been one she would never forget, shocked, almost broken, as though the image of them had pierced through every lie he had told himself. Part of her wanted to turn back, to tell him that they were his daughters, that he had missed 4 years of their lives, but the other part of her, the part that remembered the night he had abandoned her, reminded her that he had forfeited the right to that knowledge. Still, the encounter unsettled her, pulling her back into memories she thought she had buried. That night, after she had tucked Emma and Chloe into bed, Lily sat by the window in her apartment, staring at the city lights. Her success had brought her into a different world, one where she was no longer just surviving but thriving, yet Ethan's sudden reappearance threatened to unravel the peace she had fought to build. She wondered if he would come after her, if he would demand answers, if he would try to claim what he had once rejected. The thought terrified her, not because she feared losing her daughters, they would always be hers, but because part of her still remembered the man he had been, the man she had loved before his fear had turned to cruelty. She hated herself for it, but she could not deny the flicker of old emotions that stirred when their eyes had met. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself haunted in ways he could not escape. He tried to bury himself in work as he always had, but every number on the spreadsheets blurred, every meeting felt meaningless. At night, he poured himself drinks he did not finish and stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment he had seen those children. He wondered what their voices sounded like up close, what questions they asked, if they liked to draw or sing or run through the park. He wondered if they ever asked about him and if Lily had given them an answer. The thought that they might not even know his name was almost unbearable. His pride had once convinced him that walking away was strength, but now it felt like the most cowardly act of his life. In the days that followed, he began to notice the hollowness of his world with painful clarity. The women who lingered at his side seemed shallow, their laughter empty, their eyes searching for his wealth rather than his soul. His colleagues still respected him, but he saw the way they went home to their families at the end of the day, their arms filled with children who squealed with delight at their return. Ethan went home to silence, to the echo of his own footsteps in a penthouse that was far too large for one man. It was a silence that no amount of money could buy his way out of, a silence that now felt unbearable because he knew it could have been filled with the sound of two little girls calling him father. Lily kept telling herself she would not let that moment in the airport change anything, but she underestimated the way fate had a cruel way of circling back. A week later, she found her name in a magazine spread, celebrating her new line and praising her designs as the next big movement in fashion. And there, in bold letters at the bottom of the page, was the announcement that her collection would be featured at an exclusive charity gala attended by the city's wealthiest and most powerful. Ethan's world and hers, once violently torn apart, were on a collision course once again. Neither of them realized it, but the night of that gala would decide not only their futures but the futures of Emma and Chloe, the children who had unknowingly bound them together forever. For now, however, they lived in the quiet aftermath of that airport meeting, both unable to stop thinking about the other, both trapped between the ghosts of the past and the possibilities of the future. Ethan knew he had to see them again, no matter the cost, and Lily knew she had to protect her daughters at all costs. What neither of them knew was that their lives were about to be thrown into a storm more powerful than either had ever faced before. The night of the charity gala arrived with the kind of shimmering glamour that only the wealthiest corners of the city could summon. The ballroom of the luxury hotel glittered beneath chandeliers, the air filled with the soft notes of a string quartet and the low hum of conversation from men in tailored suits and women in gowns that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. Photographers hovered at the entrance, capturing every moment, every smile, every detail that would be printed in glossy magazines by the next morning. Lily had not wanted to attend at first, but her name was now attached to the event, her designs displayed on models who would walk among the crowd, and her business depended on her presence. She had chosen a gown from her own collection, deep sapphire silk that brought out the blue of her eyes, and though she told herself she was there for work, a part of her could not help but feel the weight of anticipation. She knew Ethan would likely be there. When she entered the ballroom, she carried herself with the quiet poise of a woman who had survived fire and risen from its ashes. Conversations slowed as people turned to look, whispering her name with admiration. She smiled politely, shook hands, and exchanged pleasantries, all while keeping her daughters in the back of her mind. Emma and Chloe were at home with a trusted nanny, giggling in their pajamas, blissfully unaware that their mother was walking into a night that might alter the course of their lives. Lily reminded herself that she had built her success on strength, and no man, not even Ethan, could take that from her. Ethan arrived later, his presence commanding the same attention it always had. He wore a charcoal suit cut with precision, his dark hair styled neatly, his blue eyes scanning the crowd with the calculating gaze of someone used to owning every room he entered. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, his confidence faltered. He was not here for business, not for status, not even for the publicity. He was here because he had seen Lily and the girls, and something inside him refused to let it go. He told himself he just wanted answers, but beneath that lie throbbed a truth he was afraid to name. He wanted a chance to undo the past. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and for a moment the noise of the gala seemed to fade. Lily stood taller, her chin lifting in defiance, while Ethan's carefully constructed mask cracked just enough to reveal the storm beneath. He made his way toward her, weaving through the glittering crowd, his step steady but his heart pounding harder than any deal had ever made it. Lily did not move. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled, though every nerve in her body screamed as memories of that night, the night he left her, flooded back. When he finally stood before her, there was no smile on his face, only an intensity that made the air between them vibrate. "Lily," he said quietly, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. Her name on his lips was both a wound and a balm, a reminder of what had been lost and what still lingered. She looked at him with icy composure. "Ethan." Nothing more, nothing less, but the weight of years sat heavy in that single word. They spoke in measured tones, careful not to draw attention, but every sentence was a battle. He asked about her life, about her daughters, though he did not dare use the word ours. She responded with practiced calm, offering nothing more than necessary, her words laced with a warning that this conversation had boundaries. Yet the more she spoke, the more he saw not just the woman he had abandoned but the woman she had become, resilient, successful, radiant in her own right. It stirred something in him that he had long buried, a longing not only for the family he had lost but for the woman who had always been far stronger than he had allowed himself to see. When the model stepped out wearing her designs, the room erupted in admiration. Ethan stood in the shadows, watching as Lily accepted congratulations, her cheeks glowing under the lights, her voice confident as she explained her vision to investors and buyers. Pride and regret warred inside him until he could hardly breathe. He realized that she had not only survived without him, she had thrived, and the truth cut deeper than any rejection ever could. She had built the life he once feared, the life he could have shared, and now he was the outsider looking in. Later that night, as the gala wound down and the crowd thinned, Ethan found himself standing near the exit, waiting. When Lily appeared, draping a shawl over her shoulders, he stepped forward, blocking her path. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his effort to keep it steady. For a heartbeat, she froze, her breath catching, but then her eyes hardened. "They're mine," she answered firmly. "And they don't need you." She tried to step past him, but he caught her wrist gently, desperation flashing across his face. "Lily, please. I saw them. I know. Don't shut me out without giving me a chance to explain." She pulled her hand free, her voice sharp but low. "Explain? You made your choice years ago. You wanted freedom. You left me to carry everything alone. Now you want to appear and pretend as if nothing happened? My daughters don't deserve that kind of chaos." Her words cut through him, leaving him speechless as she walked away into the night, her figure disappearing into the city's glow. Ethan stood there, the weight of her rejection heavier than he had ever known, but beneath the sting of her words burned something stronger. Determination. For the first time, Ethan knew he could not run from what he had done. He would have to fight, not for himself, but for the family he had denied and now could not imagine living without. The days after the gala were some of the longest Ethan had ever endured. He had spent his life conquering industries, manipulating markets, and commanding boardrooms, yet none of that experience prepared him for the silence that followed Lily's rejection. He replayed their conversation endlessly, hearing her words echo in his mind with cutting precision, each one reminding him that he had chosen freedom over responsibility, that he had abandoned her when she needed him most, and that the daughters he had seen at the airport had grown up without ever knowing their father. He told himself that he had no right to demand forgiveness, but at the same time, he could not ignore the pull inside him that refused to let go. For the first time, Ethan found himself not strategizing about how to win, but wondering how to make himself worthy of being allowed back into their lives. Lily, meanwhile, carried on with her routine, her face set with the same determination that had carried her through years of struggle. On the outside, nothing changed, her designs were still in demand, her days were filled with work, and Emma and Chloe were still the center of her universe. Yet inside, the encounter with Ethan had unsettled her in ways she didn't want to admit. Seeing him again had ripped open wounds she had worked tirelessly to heal, but it had also forced her to confront truths she had buried. He was the father of her children, no matter how much she wanted to deny it. And the way he had looked at them, raw and unguarded, had not been the look of a man seeking power or control. It had been the look of a man who realized what he had lost. That frightened her more than his rejection years ago, because she knew that if she allowed him in again, she risked everything she had fought to protect. Ethan began making quiet attempts to bridge the distance. He didn't storm into her studio or demand to see the girls. Instead, he started by showing up at public events where her work was displayed, standing at the edges, not drawing attention but making sure she saw him. He sent anonymous donations to the charities she supported, contributions that made headlines but which he never claimed credit for. Once, she found flowers delivered to her office with no name attached, just a note that read, "I'm sorry for everything." She told herself she didn't care, that it was too little too late, but when she tossed the note into the trash, her hands trembled more than she wanted to admit. Emma and Chloe were too young to understand the complexities of what was happening, but children notice more than adults realize. One evening, as Lily brushed Chloe's hair before bed, the little girl asked innocently, "Mommy, who was that man at the airport? The one who stared at us like he knew us?" Lily froze, her breath catching as her heart hammered in her chest. She forced a calm smile and said softly, "Just someone from Mommy's past." But when Chloe pressed further, asking why he had looked so sad, Lily had no answer. That night, after the girls were asleep, she sat by their beds and watched them breathe, wondering how long she could keep the truth from them, wondering if she had the right to keep it at all. For Ethan, the turning point came one rainy afternoon when he happened upon Lily by chance again. She was at a small cafe near her studio, sitting by the window with sketches spread out before her and a cup of tea growing cold at her side. He hesitated outside, his umbrella dripping water onto the pavement, torn between walking away and seizing the moment. Finally, he pushed the door open and stepped inside, his presence drawing her eyes instantly. She stiffened, ready to tell him to leave, but he raised a hand, his voice low and steady. "Just hear me out, Lily. Please." He didn't sit down until she nodded, reluctantly, and even then he kept his distance across the table. His words tumbled out, raw and unpolished, unlike the smooth confidence he usually wielded. He admitted his fear all those years ago, how the thought of family had terrified him, how he had convinced himself he needed freedom but had only trapped himself in emptiness. He told her about the nights he lay awake thinking of what he had thrown away, about the hollowness of his so-called freedom, about the moment at the airport that shattered everything he had built. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, his voice breaking, "but I want to try. I want to know them. I want to be in their lives. And if you'll let me, I want to make this right, even if it takes the rest of my life to prove it." Lily listened in silence, her face unreadable, though inside her heart warred against itself. Every part of her wanted to protect her daughters from disappointment, to shield them from the man who had once walked away without hesitation. But another part of her, quieter but no less insistent, remembered the love she had once felt for him, remembered the way his eyes had softened when he looked at the twins. She saw not the arrogant CEO who had abandoned her, but a man stripped of his armor, pleading not for himself but for the chance to be a father. When he finished, there was a long silence between them, broken only by the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion. "You can't erase what you did, Ethan. You left. You broke something in me that I've spent years trying to rebuild. And I won't let you walk in and out of their lives the way you walked out of mine. If you want to be in their world, you will have to prove to me, and to them, that you won't leave again. And that will take time. A lot of time." Ethan nodded, accepting her words like a sentence passed down. He knew it would not be easy, that there was no shortcut, no deal to negotiate, no quick victory to be won. But for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. Lily had not closed the door entirely. It was barely open, but it was open, and that was enough for him to step forward and begin. As he left the cafe that day, he felt the rain soaking through his suit, but for once, he didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt as though he had something worth fighting for, something real, something that could not be bought. And he knew he would fight for it, no matter how long it took. Weeks passed after their tense but honest conversation in the cafe, and Ethan found himself navigating territory that was utterly foreign to him. He was a man accustomed to controlling outcomes, to setting goals and achieving them with ruthless precision, but this was different. This was not about money or power, and no amount of strategic maneuvering could force Lily to trust him or open the door to their daughters' lives more quickly. Instead, he had to learn patience, a quality he had never possessed in his personal life. He began to adjust his schedule in ways his business associates barely recognized, turning down trips, skipping networking dinners, and even assigning others to attend high-profile meetings so that he could remain in the city. His colleagues noticed his distraction, his investors whispered about changes in his demeanor, but Ethan did not care. For the first time in years, his focus was on something greater than his empire. Lily kept her distance, testing him at every turn, waiting for him to falter and prove her fears right. She allowed small glimpses of his sincerity to pass her defenses, but she never lowered them completely. She had seen him walk away once, and she would not risk her daughters' hearts by letting him do it again. Still, she could not deny the ways he was different now. When she ran into him at community events where he donated both his money and his time, she noticed how he didn't chase cameras or bask in recognition. He was quieter, more present, often speaking with people one-on-one, listening with genuine interest. There were times when she caught him watching her from across the room, not with arrogance or entitlement, but with a kind of reverence that unsettled her. Ethan's greatest challenge came when Lily finally allowed him to meet Emma and Chloe properly, beyond the accidental encounters at the airport or in passing. It was not a grand introduction, nor was it something carefully staged. One Sunday morning, when the girls were playing in the park, Lily approached him cautiously and said, "They're here. If you want to talk to them, you can. But remember, you are a stranger to them. Keep it simple." His heart raced as he nodded, his throat tightening in a way he had never experienced in boardrooms filled with men twice his age. He walked toward them slowly, watching the twins laugh as they chased each other in the grass, their dark hair glinting in the sunlight, their blue eyes identical to his own. For a moment, he had to steady himself, overwhelmed by the sight of them. When they noticed him, they stopped running and looked up with innocent curiosity. He crouched down to their level, forcing his voice to remain gentle. "Hi," he said softly. "I'm Ethan." Emma tilted her head, studying him with open suspicion, while Chloe clutched a toy rabbit tightly to her chest. Neither spoke, and the silence stretched, but Ethan did not rush to fill it. Instead, he simply smiled and asked if he could sit while they played. To his relief, they nodded, and slowly, cautiously, he joined them in the grass. That first meeting was brief and awkward, but it was enough to plant a seed. Over the following weeks, Lily permitted more short interactions, always under her careful watch. Ethan came to the park on afternoons when they played, sometimes bringing small gifts like picture books or puzzles, though he was careful never to overwhelm them. At first, the girls accepted his presence without enthusiasm, but gradually they began to warm to him. Chloe would ask him to help tie her shoelaces, while Emma once shyly handed him a drawing she had made. Each tiny gesture cracked his heart open wider, filling it with a love so fierce it terrified him. At night, Ethan lay awake replaying every moment, every laugh, every glance from the girls. He found himself haunted by questions he had no answers to. What were their first words? What songs had soothed them to sleep as infants? Which bedtime stories had been their favorites? All those milestones had passed without him, stolen by his own choices, and no matter what he did now, he could never reclaim them. The guilt pressed on him heavily, yet it fueled his determination to be present for every moment moving forward. Lily noticed the transformation too. Though she never let her guard fully down, she could not ignore the way her daughters' faces lit up when Ethan appeared. She saw the careful patience he showed, never pushing too far, never demanding more than they were ready to give. There was a softness in him now, a humility she had never seen before, and it unnerved her because it made her wonder if forgiveness might one day be possible. But forgiveness came at a cost, and she wasn't sure her heart could survive opening itself to him again. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Lily found herself standing at the window, staring out at the city lights. She thought of the man Ethan had been, the man who had once closed the door on her with cold finality, and she contrasted it with the man who now sat in the grass at the park, tying shoelaces and laughing at knock-knock jokes. The difference was staggering, almost unbelievable, and yet undeniable. She wrapped her arms around herself, torn between the instinct to protect and the longing to believe in change. For Ethan, the true test of his sincerity came not through grand gestures but through consistency. He showed up, again and again, never failing to keep his promises, never stepping back into the shadows when things grew difficult. The twins began asking for him by name, their questions growing bolder. "Why don't you live with us?" Chloe once asked innocently. Ethan swallowed hard, glancing at Lily for guidance, but Lily simply gave a small nod. "Because I made mistakes," he answered honestly, his voice low. "But I want to be here now, if you'll let me." The little girl considered his words with the serious expression only a child could manage before nodding and running off to play. The exchange nearly broke him, not because of the pain it brought, but because of the fragile hope it carried. By the time autumn leaves began to scatter across the city streets, Ethan realized that his world had shifted permanently. The empire he once guarded so jealously no longer defined him. His wealth, his status, his power, none of it compared to the sound of Emma's laugh or the sight of Chloe slipping her hand into his without hesitation. He knew he was still on probation in Lily's eyes, that her trust was something to be earned, not given, but he was willing to wait, willing to fight, willing to keep showing up. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't chasing freedom or control. He was chasing the chance to belong. The charity gala shimmered with opulence, chandeliers spilling golden light across polished marble floors and the quiet hum of conversation filling the grand hall. Ethan had attended dozens of these events in his life, each one a display of wealth and influence, but never had he felt such nervous anticipation as he did that night. This time he wasn't there to impress investors or to flaunt his power. He was there because Lily had agreed, with hesitation but with hope in her eyes, to let him attend with her and the girls. It wasn't an announcement or a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a step into the light, an unspoken acknowledgement that his presence had shifted from intrusion to inclusion. As he entered the hall, he saw them waiting near the entrance, Lily radiant in a simple navy gown that seemed to outshine every diamond in the room, and Emma and Chloe clutching her hands in matching pale dresses, their wide blue eyes reflecting the soft glow of the chandeliers. He walked toward them slowly, afraid to move too quickly and break the fragile sense of peace that hung in the air. When Emma spotted him, she grinned and waved, her small fingers fluttering eagerly. Chloe was more reserved but allowed a tiny smile to curl at her lips as she leaned into Lily's side. Ethan felt something inside him break open, a flood of emotion so intense he nearly forgot where he was. The thought struck him suddenly, this was what family looked like, not polished photographs or staged events, but the unguarded warmth of children's smiles and the quiet strength of the woman who had held them together when he had walked away. Throughout the evening, Ethan stayed close, not as a man who owned the room but as a man who belonged to the three people beside him. He listened as Lily spoke with other guests, her confidence and grace making her the center of every circle she entered. He watched as the girls twirled on the dance floor, their laughter carrying above the music like bells. More than once, he caught strangers watching them, whispering softly as they pieced together the resemblance, the unmistakable link between him and the children. For years, he had denied it, convincing himself that distance was strength, but here, under the scrutiny of the wealthy elite, he didn't care who knew. Let them see the truth. Let them see who he was, who he had failed, and who he would never abandon again. At one point, Chloe tugged at his sleeve and whispered that she was tired. He knelt down, meeting her gaze, and without hesitation she climbed into his arms, her small body curling against him as though she had always known he was safe. The simple act nearly undid him. He held her close, inhaling the faint scent of her hair, and for the first time in years he felt whole. When he looked up, his eyes met Lily's across the room. She had seen it too, the way their daughter trusted him, and though her expression was guarded, there was a softness there, a flicker of something that looked very much like forgiveness. Later in the evening, Ethan found himself alone with Lily on a balcony overlooking the city. The music and laughter drifted faintly behind them, but out here the world felt quiet, almost suspended. Lily rested her hands on the railing, her gaze fixed on the skyline, her posture composed but tense. Ethan stood beside her, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, finally, he found his voice. "I can't change what I did," he said quietly, his words heavy with regret. "I can't give you back the years I stole or erase the pain I caused. But I can promise you this, I will never walk away again. From you. From them. From us. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Lily turned to him, her blue eyes searching his face for any trace of the man who had once chosen freedom over family. She saw the sincerity etched in every line, the vulnerability he had never allowed himself to show before. She thought of the nights she had cried alone, the mornings she had carried the weight of motherhood without a partner, the strength she had built from nothing. And then she thought of the girls, of their laughter with him, of the way they reached for him now without hesitation. Slowly, carefully, she nodded. "This isn't forgiveness," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not yet. But maybe it's the beginning of something." Ethan exhaled, relief flooding through him like light breaking through a storm. He didn't need her forgiveness that night, not all at once. What he needed was the chance to keep showing up, to keep building trust, to keep standing at her side until she no longer doubted him. He could wait for that day, no matter how long it took, because for the first time in his life he understood that love wasn't about winning or possessing. It was about staying, about choosing the people who mattered even when it was hard. When they returned inside, Emma rushed into his hand, tugging him toward the dance floor, while Chloe clung to his leg, still drowsy but unwilling to let go. He laughed, his heart overflowing as he followed them, Lily walking quietly at his side. For years, he had thought freedom meant walking away from ties, from responsibility, from love. Now he understood the truth. Freedom was not found in solitude but in belonging, in the embrace of a family that had once seemed lost to him forever. As the night wore on and the gala drew to its close, Ethan realized that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, there would be pain, but there would also be joy, laughter, and the kind of love that money could never buy. And as he looked at Lily and the girls, he knew with absolute certainty that no fortune, no empire, no freedom could ever compare to the gift he had been given that night. For the first time in years, the man who had once shut a door on love felt it swing open again, and he vowed never to close it.